And Mark Latham, I think we're all going to have a pretty similar view here, that someone losing their job because of their political views is not the country that is the young and free one that we sing about so frequently with the national anthem. But what do you think about them specifically going after this woman, and specifically doing so in part because, as they said in the letter, she was associated with One Nation?
Well, Paul, it's an attack on our democracy and the principle that you can have a job as a citizen, you run for parliament, and if you miss out, you go back to your job, regardless of the policies you're putting forward at election time. And if we're to encourage people to be involved in the democratic process, you can't hang the threat of a sacking over their head. So it's a dreadful thing in our democracy. It's a Chinese-owned company. Perhaps they don't understand the principles of a free election, where you can run freely and not have an employment sanction or penalty when you go back to your job. But for the spokesperson to say it's got nothing to do with One Nation or policies, there's half a page here headed up potential breaches of code of conduct and conflict of interest. And the complaints they've got against the One Nation policies go on and on. They start with the idea that Gay Cameron, as a candidate, rejected support for taxpayer subsidies for renewable sources of energy, which is basically saying you can run for parliament, but you've got to tip public money into our coffers on the way through. And that's acceptable. If you don't do that, then we'll sack you. The second one is doubting the ability of renewable energies to provide baseload power. Well, hello, when the sun doesn't shine, there's no solar. When the wind doesn't blow, there's no wind power. So it's a statement of fact that they've sacked her for on the second matter. And the third matter, they're opposed to the building of new low-emission coal-fired power stations. Well, a bit of competition and keeping prices down and keeping the lights on is actually good for Australia, and that's why we have elections. So this is excessive use of corporate power. On top of the Israel Folau decision, where someone was sacked for their religious views, we've now got someone sacked for their political views and even worse, their political participation, Paul. It just doesn't get any worse than this, and the company is in a state of delusion if they've got someone out there saying it's got nothing to do with politics.
Yeah, I mean, Rita, let's talk about it. Let's replace the words One Nation and with Labor or the Greens or the Liberal Party. If there was a story that a private company turned around and essentially took revenge upon that person, with the allegation being, and even in written warning letters, that their association with the political party, well, it reflected poorly upon them as an employee, this will be a much bigger story. But because, of course, it's One Nation, everyone goes hands off. Too bad, they're radioactive, and if you catch if you catch something from it, well, too bad. This is all about trying to, for want of a better term, deplatform participants in the process who happen to agree with a freely formed democratic political party.
Absolutely. They want to make the price of participating in that process, putting your hand up and being a nominee and being a candidate for a party like One Nation, they want the price of that to be so high that it discourages people to take part. And I couldn't believe some of the points that were in that letter, including the fact that One Nation's policies were counter to China's interests. Well, hello, we're in Australia. Why should any political party in this country have policies that advance China's interests? So that, to me, was remarkable that they actually pointed that out. And it is completely unacceptable. It wouldn't be happening if this was a Greens candidate. And I really do hope she pursues this. I know it's very stressful to have any sort of legal action, but I think this is one worth pursuing because the principle in this are so important. Adam Crichton had a fantastic piece in The Australian today all about the codes of conduct that corporations have and how they are really infringing upon the rights of individuals. They are dictating what you should do and think outside of the workplace, and I think that is unacceptable to most Australians.
Well, and it's this thing again, Mark, where it's fairly obvious here that there is a price that must be paid for associating with the quote-unquote unfashionable opinions that exist on the conservative side of politics. That if you exist to the right of, you know, the Greens, something is wrong with you. This isn't Twitter justice, this is head office justice.
Well, it's the excessive use of corporate power, but let's also understand Gay Cameron, who's a very, very good person, ran for us in the state election in the seat of Miranda. She wouldn't have a discriminatory bone in her body, very fair, decent, hard-working person. She worked for this company, Goldwyn, as a health and safety officer, risk management, trying to ensure there were no accidents on the site. So she wasn't there generating a form of power. of energy. Her job was to keep people alive and free of injury on the work site. So it really had nothing to do with energy policy, but they've kicked her out for that reason. And there's another one here they've got that they're objecting to the fact that One Nation wanted multinational companies to pay more in tax. Well, hello, that was everyone's policy. Labor, Greens, Liberal Party in the election campaign. So she's been punted here for something that everyone was advocating in the national interest, that these overseas companies should pay a bit more in tax. So, you know, it really is the pits, isn't it? I mean, we've got used to the idea, not used to it really, but we've heard of the idea that these companies think they own their employees. They give them all sorts of training that's got nothing to do with the workplace, domestic violence training, unconscious bias training, diversity and inclusion training. I've heard of people who have to be trained up about the meaning of transgender. But here's a clear example of a company rubbing someone out because they ran for an election and put forward in their heart of hearts the things that they thought were good for Australia. So this is really the worst thing that you could ever see in a free and open democracy, and this company should be ashamed of themselves.
Yeah, I mean, Anna, it's pretty obvious here that the rules are different if you want to be associated with One Nation, which last time I checked was a political party that has successfully been able to get candidates up. And we're not talking here about, you know, the Fraser Annings of this world who get, you know, 0.06% or whatever in the one state they ran. There are 2 senators in Queensland. There's an upper house member in New South Wales. There has been a senator elected in New South Wales, one elected in Western Australia in the previous parliament. There's an upper house representation in Western Australia as well. This is not some fringe political movement here. It's one that a reasonable number of Australians actually are willing to publicly support. The idea that you would lose your job for running for that party seems pretty hot.
Yeah, that's right, Paul. I mean, we're going to be all on a unity ticket here because it is just absolutely outrageous. I mean, the company has clearly missed the memo that New South Wales is a democracy. You know, you're right, like there clearly could be this issue of One Nation being uncomfortable, and that's why this has been moved against. But the point is, if you make this position against One Nation, where is this going to stop? I mean, I heard Caroline Marcus, the reporter, say that the judge said this was a test case, basically. So for that reason, we need to all take a really strong stance against this. It is completely unacceptable that, you know, any individual can't have an opinion in the workplace. You know, we need people to be able to run for politics. We need people to have political opinions. And the idea that a company's values can trump that is just extraordinary. And I think most Australians would stand with this panel.
All right, well, keen to know what you're thinking. If you've got plenty more to say, of course, Mark Latham's Facebook page will have more information about this. Mark Latham's Outsiders. If you want to write me an email, please do, pmurray@skynews.com.au.